Welcome to the module Completing Early Childhood Outcome Ratings using the COSF. In 2006, the federal government began requiring states to measure the impact of early intervention and early childhood special education programs. Kansas, along with the majority of other states in the nation, adopted the Child Outcome Summary Form as a formal means of measuring and reporting child progress. This module is intended as an initial or refresher training in how to use the Child Outcome Summary Form to report early childhood outcomes. In this module, we will review the history and intent of the 3 early childhood outcomes and provide information on the 4-step rating process, including where you can find additional information and resources to support your understanding and use of the early childhood outcomes. This module will not cover use or entry of early childhood outcome ratings into the Outcome Web System, or the OWS. Information about the OWS and how to use the system can be found on the Kansas In-Service Training System website at www.kskits.org on the Early Childhood Outcome Resource page. We are in an age of accountability, which increasingly means looking at results and not only the provision of services. In 1993, the Government Performance and Results Act required all federal programs to report data on results. In their review, the Office of Management and Budget had found that Part C early intervention programs and Part B preschool programs did not have data to show their programs' effectiveness or results. The Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, responded by requiring states to produce outcome data on children participating in early intervention and early childhood special education programs as part of their state and local annual performance reports. There are 20 performance indicators for Part B and 14 for Part C. Indicators are divided into 2 groups, compliance and results indicators. Compliance indicators have targets set by the Office of Special Education Programs, while results indicators have targets set by the state with stakeholder input. Targets for results indicators must demonstrate a slope of improvement from state baseline data. The early childhood outcomes are results indicators. Each year in the spring, local Part C and B programs receive a rating from the state on both compliance and results indicators. Indicator 3 for Part C programs and Indicator 7 for Part B programs report the results of early childhood outcome ratings that local programs submit through the OWS database. In 2003, the Federal Office of Special Education Programs funded the Early Childhood Outcomes Center, or the ECHO Center, to develop a way to report data on early childhood outcomes. The ECHO Center developed the Child Outcome Summary Form, or the COSF, as a means of reporting on early childhood outcomes. Kansas, along with the majority of states, adopted the COSF, and programs began using the COSF rating process in 2006. In 2004, the ECHO Center brought together an extensive stakeholder group of national experts to draft a vision and outcomes for Part C early intervention and Part B preschool special education programs. Stakeholders involved in the process included families, providers, teachers, local, state, and federal administrators, and researchers. Stakeholders developed a goal that is based on a vision for what all families would want for their children. They said the goal of early intervention, early childhood special education, is to enable young children to be active and successful participants during the early childhood years and in the future in a variety of settings, in their homes, with their families, in childcare, in preschool or school programs, and in the community. The early childhood outcomes were based on this overarching goal. The 3 early childhood outcomes represent what we want children to gain as a result of participation in our early childhood programs. We want them to have positive social emotional skills. We want them to be able to acquire and use knowledge and skills across settings and situations, and we want children to use appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. The 3 outcomes are the same for both Part C and Part B. They're meant to reflect how a child functionally uses skills across settings and situations, and not where children score on standardized tests. Standardized test scores actually tell us very little about how a child functionally navigates and interacts in everyday settings and situations. So as teams begin the rating process, they need to think beyond test scores and developmental domains. Outcome 1 states that children will have positive social relationships. A caring, warm relationship between a parent and a child is the foundation for all subsequent development. From this foundation, a young child begins to develop a positive sense of self and can begin to build relationships with other family members and those outside the family, such as peers. Making new friends and learning to get along with others is an important accomplishment of the early childhood years. Children develop a sense of who they are by having rich and rewarding experiences interacting with adults and peers. They also learn that different rules and norms apply to different everyday settings and that they need to behave accordingly. All children need support from adults in learning how to be successful participants in their social world, but some children who face challenges in this area need additional or specialized support. Children who achieve this outcome show a variety of behaviors related to making and maintaining positive social relationships in age-appropriate ways. For example, they demonstrate attachment with significant caregivers in their lives, are able to initiate and maintain social interactions, behave in ways that allow them to participate in a variety of settings and situations, such as the playground, at a restaurant, at the grocery store, or in childcare, demonstrate trust in others. They can build and maintain relationships with other children and adults. They're able to regulate their emotions. They understand and follow rules, and they can solve social problems. Outcome 2 states that children will learn to acquire and use knowledge and skills. Over the early childhood period, children display tremendous changes in what they know and what they can do. Everyday life can present children with a variety of natural learning opportunities that serve to help children acquire progressively more advanced skills. Parents and other adults support children's acquisition of knowledge and skills by providing children with safe, nurturing, and stimulating environments in which learning can flourish. Children with special needs can face a variety of challenges related to acquiring knowledge and skills, and may need additional supports to realize their potential. The knowledge and skills acquired in the early childhood years, especially those related to communication, pre-literacy, and pre-numeracy, provide the foundation for success in kindergarten and the early school years. Children who achieve this outcome show a variety of behaviors related to acquiring and using knowledge and skills across a variety of everyday routines and activities. For example, they display curiosity and an eagerness for learning. They're able to explore their environment, explore and play with people and objects including toys, books, and other materials, engage in daily learning opportunities through manipulating toys and other objects in appropriate ways, use vocabulary either through spoken means, sign language, or through augmentative communication devices to communicate in increasingly complex forms. They learn new skills and use these skills in play, such as completing a puzzle or building a fort. They acquire and use the precursor skills that will allow them to begin to learn reading and math in kindergarten, and they show imagination and creativity in their play. Outcome 3 looks at how children take action to meet their needs. As children develop, they become increasingly more capable of acting on their world. Babies cry to communicate hunger, whereas an older child can ask for something to eat. Children have a variety of needs such as to eat, sleep, play, move, explore, and communicate. With the help of supportive adults, young children become able to address their needs in more sophisticated ways and with increasing independence over the course of the early childhood years. They integrate their developing skills to achieve a goal that is of value to them, such as showing their artwork to an adult and describing what it is, or pointing to a toy and asking for it. Children with disabilities may use specialized technology or may need assistance from adults to allow them to meet their needs. Children who take appropriate action to meet their needs show a variety of behaviors related to this outcome. For example, they're able to use gestures, sounds, words, signs, or other means to communicate their wants and needs. They can meet their self-care needs such as feeding, dressing, and toileting, which allows them to participate in everyday routines and activities. They use objects such as forks, sticks, pencils, crayons, clay, scissors, switches, and other devices as tools in appropriate ways. They're able to move from place to place to participate in everyday activities, play, and routine. They can seek help when necessary to move from place to place. They can seek help when necessary to assist them with basic care or other needs, and they're able to follow rules related to health and safety. If you would like more information about the 3 early childhood outcomes, the link in this slide is to a video that provides further information about the history and intent of the early childhood outcomes that was produced by the Echo Center. It's important for early childhood professionals to keep the following key points in mind as they assign ratings on the outcomes. None of the 3 outcomes are domain specific. That means there is not a communication outcome, there's not a motor outcome, and there's not a classroom specific outcome. Rather, all developmental domains cut across all 3 outcomes. Therefore, it's probable that the same developmental area can impact a child's rating in all 3 outcomes. For example, a child who has limited communication skills may have difficulty understanding and following rules and solving social problems, which would impact their rating on outcome 1. They may also have difficulty understanding and using more complex language for learning, which would impact their rating for outcome 2. And their difficulty communicating can also impact their ability to get their needs met, which would impact their rating in outcome 3. That's why all children, regardless of their disability category, must be rated on all 3 outcomes each time a rating is required. When rating outcomes, we are also asked to make a rating based on how the child uses skills functionally in their daily lives, rather than based on test scores. We're not looking at whether a child has skills, but how a child uses the skills they have. Therefore, it's possible that a child can have delays that qualify them for special education services, but when looking at how they functionally relate to others, how they acquire and use knowledge and or get their needs met, we could say that they are functioning at the same level as other children their age. The 3 outcomes are broad. They're meant to give a snapshot of the whole child in his or her everyday life. It's also important to remember that each time you're asked to rate a child, you are always comparing that child's current functioning with other children the same age. It's also important to understand the difference between isolated and functional behaviors and skills. Think about isolated behaviors and what observing them tells you about the child. For example, suppose an assessment instrument asks you to observe whether or not a child can point. If you know that a child can point, do you know that the child can communicate their wants and needs? If you know that a child can't point, do you know that she can't communicate her wants and needs? It's only when we know how a child uses the isolated skill of pointing that we understand how the child takes action to meet their needs. When we rate a child on an outcome, we're not rating the child's capacity to function under unusual or ideal circumstances. Functional skills answer the so what question. It answers why the child does what he or she is able to do, supplies a purpose of the action or the skill. There's a difference between a child being able to imitate a gesture when prompted by others, and a child who can watch what a peer says or does and incorporate it into his or her own play. It's the latter that we want to think about when assigning a rating to the outcomes. In the same way, knowing a child can use 2-word utterances doesn't tell us much about how a child uses their communication to communicate. But knowing that a child engages in conversational turns with a caregiver using 2-word utterances to communicate their needs for favorite foods tells us a lot about a child's ability to get their needs met. The Early Childhood Outcome Rating Scale is a 7-point scale that compares a child to other children the same age at 4 points in time. First, when a child first enters Part C Early Intervention Services. Next, when a child permanently exits Part C Early Intervention Services. Third, when a child first enters Part B Preschool Services. And lastly, when that child permanently leaves Part B Services. It's very important that teams remember the 7-point rating scale is not an assessment instrument. The rating is a judgment based on authentic assessment information, which yields information about functional behavior in children's typical natural settings, what they really know and do. It's also important to note that ratings are made by teams. Individuals other than early childhood professionals may be included in the rating process, but at least 2 professionals are required to complete the rating. On the Early Childhood Outcome Rating Scale, a score of 6 or a 7 reflects functioning that is comparable to same-age peers. A rating of 7 means that the child shows functioning expected for his or her age in all or almost all everyday situations. Functioning is considered appropriate for the child's age. A rating of 6 means that the child's functioning is generally considered age appropriate for his or her age, but there are some concerns about the child's functioning in the outcome area. Although age appropriate, the child's functioning may border on not keeping pace with age expectations. Ratings below 6 are considered as not age appropriate. A rating of 5 means a child shows functioning expected for his or her age some of the time and or in some settings and situations. The child's functioning is a mixture of age-appropriate and not age-appropriate behaviors and skills. A rating of 7 means a child shows occasional age-appropriate functioning across settings and situations. More functioning is not age-appropriate than is age-appropriate. A rating of 3 means a child does not yet show functioning expected of a child of his or her age in any situation. A rating of 2 means a child shows occasional use of immediate foundational skills. And immediate foundational skills are those skills that occur just before age-appropriate skills. So there are skills that are about 3 to 6 months delayed. More of the child's functioning reflects skills that are foundational or more delayed than 3 to 6 months than skills that are delayed about 3 to 6 months. And a rating of 1 means the child does not yet show functioning expected of a child in his or her age in any situation. The child's functioning does not yet include immediate foundational skills and includes only foundational skills or those skills that are more than 6 months delayed. Now, the definitions of the outcomes ratings handout can be found on the KITS website, which is www.kits.org, by going to the ECHO page. Open the ECHO training folder, then in the group training resources, there's a document called Group Training Materials. In that folder, you'll find the definitions of outcome rating handout. In Kansas, we think about the early childhood outcome rating as a 4-step process. Assessment is the first step because in order to make a rating, teams have to collect curriculum-based assessment information along with other information about a child's functional performance across settings and situations. Once assessment information is collected, teams will need to organize that information in a way that allows them to think about the child's abilities in the 3 outcome areas. With assessment information organized, the use of the decision tree, or step 3, helps teams assign a rating on each of the 3 early childhood outcomes. The 4th step is to document that rating on the child outcome summary form. It's important here to note that the final step is to enter the COSF information into the OWS database. Early childhood programs handle the entering of information into the OWS in different ways. Some have teachers enter this information directly, while others have a data entry person who uses paper COSF forms to enter the information into the OWS. You'll need to check with your local program to find out your responsibilities on entering data into the OWS. Instructions about the OWS can be found on the KITS website. Before making an early childhood outcome rating, teams have to collect current assessment information. One of the requirements in Kansas is that teams administer one of the 8 approved curriculum-based assessment tools in its entirety and document the results of the curriculum-based assessment in the rating. While Kansas only requires the use of a curriculum-based assessment to make a rating when a child enters and leaves services, it's highly recommended that the curriculum-based assessment tool be used to help track a child's progress while they're in early intervention or early childhood special education, and to help teams develop functional goals multiple times across the years a child's in services. Any of the 8 approved curriculum-based assessments can be used for the purposes of making a rating for a child, and programs don't have to choose just one. They can use any of the 8 tools. They can use a different tool when a child enters than when a child leaves. Curriculum-based assessments were chosen because they really help teams facilitate authentic assessment, and they can help teams develop functional goals and outcomes, as well as providing a tool for ongoing assessment of progress for a child. To support teams in using information about a curriculum-based assessment to do the actual early childhood outcome rating, publishers have created crosswalks between the items on each curriculum-based assessment and the 3 outcomes. Practitioners can use these crosswalks to help them identify skills from the curriculum-based assessment that might be important for each of the outcomes. The instrument crosswalks can be found on the Echo Center webpage or from that tool's publisher. Parent information is also required when completing the COSF rating.
But it's necessary
Parents see their child in settings that others on the team do not. They know the child better than anyone else on the team, and information from parents can be collected in many different ways, through both formal and informal interviews, through a questionnaire, a checklist, or other tools and methods. During the assessment process, teams need to think about how they will gather this information and make a plan for its collection. Parents and family members are not required team members for actually making the early childhood outcome rating. However, if your team chooses to include the parents or other family members directly when making the outcome rating, you need to ensure that the family understand both the rating process and their role on the team. The ECHO website has a video that would be a great resource to use with families to provide them with an orientation to the rating process. In addition, the KITS website also has resources for families. The Kansas ECHO Family Brochure can be found under the folder Especially for Families on the KITS ECHO webpage. Information obtained from one of the 8 approved curriculum-based assessments, as well as parent information, are required as supporting documentation on the Child Outcome Summary form. However, this information can be supplemented with additional information as needed to complete the Child Outcome Summary form rating process. Use of record review, interview, observational records, and other tests may also be used as supporting evidence for the team's rating. Keep in mind the COSF requires that teams use more than one source of data when documenting their supporting evidence for the rating. There is one exception to the requirement that one of the eight curriculum-based assessments be administered before an early childhood outcome rating can be determined. And that's for children who are receiving services for only one area of concern. So a child who is only getting speech and language services, or a child who is only getting occupational therapy services, or a child who is only getting physical therapy. If any of those children can confidently be rated as only getting one service, on all three outcomes, be rated as 6 or 7 record review, by the observation, on all three outcomes, other tests, then the requirement that a curriculum-based assessment be administered is waived. And that child must still be rated on a COSF keep in mind at entry and exit. But COSF rating must be determined both at entry and exit, assessment, and those children are still going to be entered into the OWS other testing database done. You just don't have to document the curriculum-based assessment on the COSF. It's also important that programs understand that there are also reasons that programs want to make sure that who are only getting one service should automatically be rated as 6 or 7. We know that there are children we know that when that happens in places that can affect their early childhood outcome indicator. And in that case, those teams need to make that individual decisions. And if they're going to rate a child 5 only for those kids, any one of the outcomes, then they are also going to be required based on the testing you've done a 6 or 7 on all 3 assessments, and include that as documentation. If a child receives a 5 or less on any one outcome, then the team is required to administer a curriculum-based assessment before they complete an early childhood outcome rating and enter that information onto the COSF. Once assessment information has been collected in the early childhood outcome rating process is organizing your assessment information so that the team can use the decision tree. The documenting the basis for the rating form is a recommended tool for organizing assessment information. This form makes it easier for teams to document a child's functioning in a consistent manner and makes answering the questions on the decision tree much more consistent. It can also be helpful to teams as they consider IEP or IFSP goals and outcomes related to supporting children's growth across the 3 outcomes. Programs that use the documenting the basis for the rating form have found that they are much more consistent in the ways they rate students across team members, which has helped to improve the consistency of their programs of their early childhood outcome indicator data. This form can be found on the KIDS website on the ECHO page, in the Kansas ECHO form under Child Outcome Summary Process Forms. The documenting the basis for the rating form is divided into 3 sections. Each outcome has space for the team to record skills that are age appropriate on the far right hand side, skills that fall into the immediate foundational range in the middle, and skills that would fall into the foundational range on the far left. Additionally, there is a box at the bottom for skills of the form that do not fit easily into any of the other 3 categories that should be considered when the team makes the rating. To use the documenting the basis for the rating form, teams need to understand the difference between age-expected skills, immediate foundational skills, and foundational skills. Age-expected skills are documented in the far right column on the documenting the basis for the rating form and include those skills and behaviors related to that outcome that are what one would expect for a child of the same age. The Early Childhood Outcome Measurement System compares the functioning of a child in a Part C or B preschool program to age expectations because age expectations provide a common standard for all young children. It's important to note that the ratings on the early childhood outcomes are not tied to eligibility for special education. The 3 outcomes look at how a child uses skills to maintain positive social relationships, how they use skills to acquire and use knowledge and skills, and how they use their skills to get their needs met. While it is likely that a child with a disability will be impacted across one or all three outcomes, it's also possible that a child with a disability may successfully use skills in the three outcome areas in age-appropriate ways. Teams must consider how a child functions related to the outcome to determine whether they are functioning in ways that are age-expected. Immediate foundational skills are documented in the middle column of the Documenting the Basis for the Rating form and are an important developmental concept for understanding how to use the COSF scale. When a child's functioning does not meet age expectations, but the child demonstrates skills and behaviors that occur developmentally just prior to age-expected functioning and are the basis on which to build age-expected functioning, they are considered immediate foundational skills. Thinking about functional behaviors that are between 3 to 4 months below age expectations provides a guide for determining if the behavior is an immediate foundational skill. Foundational skills are documented in the far left corner of the Documenting the Basis for the Rating form. Foundational skills are skills that are conceptually linked to the outcome but below age expectations and are not considered immediate foundational skills. When organizing your assessment information, it's important to keep in mind that some skills get replaced by newer skills, and others continue in children and adults' repertoires. To identify whether functioning that continues throughout life constitutes an immediate foundational skill, such as eating with a fork, turn-taking, smiling, you need to consider at what age one would first expect to see this functioning and how close it is to that child's current functional age. Additional information on age expected, immediate foundational, and foundational skills is available in the document titled Age Expected and Immediate Foundational Skills that can be downloaded from the KITS website. Also on the KITS website is an alignment of the Kansas Early Learning Standards with the three outcomes. Once you have your assessment information organized, the third step in the rating process is for the team to use the decision tree to get a summary rating on each of the three outcome areas. The decision tree can be found on the KITS website on the main ECHO page in the Kansas ECHO Form folder under Child Outcome Summary Process Forms. The decision tree was created by the ECHO Center to assist team discussions while making early childhood outcome ratings. There have been previous versions, so be sure you are using the form that is dated 5/09. Starting with the question at the top, teams answer each question following the path that most describes the child to reach a rating on one of the 7 points of the ECHO rating scale. To understand how the Documenting the Basis for the Rating form and the decision tree work together, let's use this completed Documenting the Basis for the Rating form and talk through a rating for this child on Outcome 1. The first question on the decision tree is, does the child ever function in ways that would be considered age appropriate with regard to this outcome? We can see that the team has not documented anything in the age appropriate category for the child on this outcome, so we would say no. Following the no path on the decision tree, the next question would be, does the child use any immediate foundational skills related to this outcome upon which to build age-appropriate functioning across settings and situations? We can see that the team has documented some immediate foundational skills in the middle column, so we would follow the yes path on the decision tree to the next question, which is, to what extent is the child using immediate foundational skills across settings and situations? Is it occasional use of immediate foundational skills or use of immediate foundational skills most or all of the time across settings and situations? In this example, it appears that the child uses more foundational skills than immediate foundational skills. So on that basis, we might rate the child a 2 on this outcome. You can see how organizing your assessment information into the 3 categories of age-appropriate, immediate foundational, and foundational skills makes the decision tree process less subjective and more consistent across team members. The final step in the early childhood outcome rating process is to document your team's rating on the Child Outcome Summary Form, or the COSF, which is what will be entered into the Outcome Web System Database, or the OWS. The COSF is the documentation of the team's rating. On the front page, teams indicate the date of the rating, which must be within 30 days of the beginning or ending of services, depending on whether you are doing an entry or an exit COSF rating. You're also required to document the first or last date of services that's listed on the IFSP or the IEP. Each child will need a Kids ID number, which must be recorded on the form. Local Part C programs and school districts have strategies in place for obtaining Kids ID numbers. Check with your local program about how this would be done. Be sure that you use the child's legal name on the form and not a nickname or preferred name. This will ensure that as the child moves from one program to another, from a Part C program to a Part B program, that their information gets transferred with them. So we always want to make sure we use the child's legal first and last names.
All persons who are part of the discussion
about the actual rating should be listed in the team member section of the COSF.
Kansas requires teams of at least two professionals
to make this early childhood outcome rating
not have to have been part of the
be documented on the COSF
but they do
form.
have to have access to
team members don't have to have been part of the evaluation, but they do have to have access to assessment information and understand the rating process.
There may not be another team member.
So, for example, a child who is only receiving speech and language services might have only the speech and language pathologist as the team member who did the actual assessment. But for the early childhood outcome rating process, an administrator, another SLP, or an ECSE teacher who has reviewed the assessment information can serve as that second team member for the early childhood outcome rating.
When you complete the team
Parents are only listed as part of the team if they were actually part of the discussion about the rating
manual, which can be found on the KITS website.
When completing the team members' roles, you're going to choose from one of the roles that's in Table 2 in the OWS manual, which can be found on the KITS website.
Also remember that teams
if a person's specific role is not listed in Table 2, then just choose the role that is most closely associated with that person's actual role.
Teams to document the methods
teams must use and document their use of family information on the
all methods
child functioning. So just under where it talks about team members is a place for teams to document the methods that they use to collect information from the family. Please check all that apply.
The Child Outcome Summary Form. The Child Outcome Summary Form consists of 4 pages. There's a page that has identifying information. That's the front page we just talked about. Information. And then each of the 3 outcomes has a remaining pages is devoted to one of the 3 outcomes. Their rating for that outcome. Each outcome and the documentation has a separate page for the team supports that rating. Record their rating. So at the top of the outcome with the documentation they use, the outcome itself is listed along with some indicators. At the top of the page, the team should think about as they make their ratings, as well as that they think about what kinds of examples to use in their summary of relevant information, and when they determine how they got to that rating. These indicators are also remember that all children must be rated making a rating about that, regardless of the severity of their disabilities. Remember, all children must be rated for each entry and exit COSF, regardless of the severity of their disability. Their rating on the 7-point scale for both entry and exit of the 3 outcome summary form ratings. Then they document a summary their rating of the supporting evidence that was used to make for each of the 3 outcomes. Then they're going to document a summary and exit supporting evidence that they Table 3 when they determine that of the rating. OWS manual. Teams should refer to Table 3 that are in the drop-down menu of the OWS for sources of information that are in the drop-down menu of the OWS. Not in Table 3. If a test or method was used that information not on Table 3, they would choose in the drop-down that source of information as observation, as
and
the
lists a specific
source
test or method in the summary
and
of
then
relevant
in
results.
the summary of relevant results
In
section,
Kansas, teams
they
are
can
required
list
to
the
document
actual
information
test or the method
from
that
their
was used.
selected curriculum-based assessment.
In Kansas, teams are required to document information
curriculum-based
from their
assessments
selected
and
curriculum-based
information
assessment
from parents
as
as
well
two
as
sources
information
of
from parents.
information.
As two of the
These
sources
two
of
sources of
information.
data must be documented.
These two sources of
but
data
other
must
relevant
be documented.
information should
But
also
other
be
relevant
included
information should
when it
also
helps
be
to
included
describe
to
why
help
the
explain
team
the rating.
chose the rating that they
The
chose.
OWS also
The
only
OWS
allows for one
also
date to
allows
be used
for
for
only
each
one
source
date
of
to be
information.
used for each source of
Often
information.
early childhood assessments
We
occur
know that
over
often
several
early
days.
childhood assessments
Teams
occur
should
over
document the
several
last
days.
day
Teams should document the last date
was used
that a specific
as the
assessment
date
or
of
method
that
was
source of
used
data.
as the date for
Sometimes
that
we've
source
seen
of
teams
information.
use the same date as
We've
the actual
seen sometimes where teams
rating
will
that
use
was
the
made,
date of the
and that's
COSF
not what this
rating
section is
as
looking
the
for.
date
We're looking
of the
for the
source of
date that the
information.
source of information
But this isn't
was
what we're trying to
collected,
get
not the date of the rating.
at this point. We're trying to find out when information was actually
summary
collected.
of relevant results.
So using
should
accurate
include
dates will be
functional
helpful.
examples of the child's abilities versus a listing
Documentation
of
in the summary of relevant
skills.
results
You can list test
should
scores, but
include
they're not
functional
required,
examples of the
and
child's
they can't
abilities
be used in place
versus
of
a listing of
functional
isolated
examples.
skills. When
Test
you
think
scores
about
are
what
optional,
to document.
they're not required,
Think about that you're
and they can't
representing
be used in
functioning
place
across
of
a
functional
variety
examples.
of settings and situations.
Documentation
and you want
should
to talk
also
about what the
represent
child's able to
functioning
do,
across
not
a
just
variety
list
of
the
settings
things that
and
they're not able
situations,
to do.
and stated in
It
be
may be
stated
helpful
in
for
terms of
teams
what the
to
child's
identify
able
the
to
information
do,
in terms
rather
of
than
skills
listing
that are
the
examples
things
of
that a
age
child's
expected
not able to
functioning,
do.
immediate
It
foundational
may
or
be helpful for
foundational
teams
skills
to
and
identify the
behaviors,
information
and document
in terms
that
of skills
in the
that are
summary of
examples of
relevant
age
results,
expected functioning,
putting
immediate foundational
parentheses
functioning,
with
or
age
foundational
expected or
skills
immediate
and behaviors.
foundational after the source of information.
When children are permanently exiting
Only
Part
when
C
children
or
are
B
permanently
services,
exiting a Part
question
C
B
or
must
B
be also
program
answered.
does question B need to be answered. A permanent exit occurs when a child is no longer receiving Part C infant toddler services or is no longer receiving Part B preschool services in any program in the state. Remember, a child needs a new COSF when they permanently exit either Part C or Part B services. But this is different than if they move from one program in the state to another program in the state. If they continue on with services, then that information does get entered into the OWS, but a new COSF isn't required. A new COSF is required when there's been a permanent exit, which would mean that the child left Part C services at age 3, that would be a permanent exit, or the child left preschool special education services to go to kindergarten. It's also a permanent exit if a child's in a Part B preschool program and they turn 6 and they're not in kindergarten. At the time they turn 6, you would permanently exit them and do a new COSF. Other permanent exits include when a child's no longer needing services under IDEA. So in other words, they've met their IFSP or their IEP goals or outcomes and they've been dismissed from services. When a child moves out of state, when a child's withdrawn from services by their parent or guardian, or when a child dies while in services. You can see the OWS manual for more information about permanent exits. But when you do an exit COSF rating, that's the time you have to answer question B on pages 2, 3, and 4 of the COSF form. In this space, teams are going to indicate whether the child has made any progress on each of the outcomes and then provide a short summary of the most significant evidence of that progress. You don't need to write an exhaustive report about the kind of progress they've made while they've been in services, just something that illustrates that they have made progress. Keep in mind that because we are comparing children to their same age peers when we do a early childhood outcome rating, a child who scores 3 when they come in and 3 when they leave has demonstrated progress because we're comparing that child to 2 different age groups. If a child has gained even one new functional behavior from the time they entered to the time they left services, then the answer to the progress question is yes,
and then you just describe that progress. We expect you will have very few kids where you would answer no to that question. This slide shows the first page of a completed COSF. You can see that the first date of service and the date of the rating are within 30 days of each other. Rachel's complete legal name has been documented, including her date of birth and her kid's ID number. The team for this COSF rating included the SLP and the ECSE teacher, and family information was collected both separately and incorporated into the assessments. In this example, parent information was used to make the rating, but the parent was not part of the team who made the rating. This slide depicts the rating and supporting documentation for Outcome 2. Remember, for all children, all 3 outcomes must be rated. We can see that Rachel's team gave her a rating of 5 on the 7-point Early Childhood Outcome Rating Scale. As documentation, they have included an interview, observations, and the AEPS as their sources of information. They have listed only one date for each source of data and have summarized key skills and behaviors that led them to a rating of 5. They have included the curriculum-based assessment and information from parents as 2 sources of data in their supporting evidence. In the Summary of Relevant Results section, the team has included functional information about what Rachel is currently doing related to the outcome area. While it is not required, they have also included whether the functional skills and behaviors they are listing are age appropriate, whether they're immediate foundational, or whether they're foundational skills. Because this is an example of an entry rating, they have not answered question B. If, however, it had been an exit rating, the team would have circled yes or no to the question of progress and included an example of a new skill that Rachel is using since her initial rating. The KITS website has several examples of completed COSFs. You can find them by clicking on ECHO Case Studies, which is a link off the main ECHO page. As previously discussed, the final step in the Early Childhood Outcome rating process is to enter the COSF information into the OWS database. Each program has specific procedures for this final step, so check with your program for further information. The KITS website has both the OWS manual and a link to the OWS website. An individual must be a registered user to access the OWS. For support on registering, or if you have questions, you can contact Sarah Walters if you're a Part C provider, or Tiffany Smith if you're a Part B preschool provider. If you do enter information into the OWS, you should know that if there is no server activity for 30 minutes, the system does time out and all the data is lost. So if you click on a button or a link as you go along, this will register as activity with the system and keep it from kicking you out. You also need to understand that when you do enter a COSF, you have to enter all of the information at the same time. You cannot enter part of the information, save it, and then come back later and enter more information. The system doesn't allow this type of saving. However, there is opportunity to save as you go, so we do recommend that as you enter pieces of information, you hit submit after you finish entering each piece of data so that you don't lose any data. This slide is a screenshot of the homepage for the Kansas Early Childhood Outcomes, which can be found on the KITS webpage at www.kskits.org. From this page, you can link to information that we have covered, as well as other information about early childhood outcomes. There are links on this page to the OWS database, to the manual, to the Kansas ECHO forms, to the Kansas ECHO case studies, to the data analysis and other information. In addition, information has been organized based on a person's role. There's a link from this page to information that would be most helpful for administrators, one for data entry personnel, a link for direct service providers, and information for families. There are also links for training materials if you would like to provide in-service training to a group around the early childhood outcomes. In addition, there are links for other websites that will provide you more information about early childhood outcomes, including a link to the Echo Center. We hope this information has been helpful in understanding the Kansas Early Childhood Outcome Rating process and how to complete this Child Outcome Summary form. If you need any additional information or would like some assistance, please contact any of the KIT staff members or make a request through the Technical Assistance System Network through the TASM website at ksdetasn.org.